Good afternoon and welcome to Sporty's webinar on flight simulators, what pilots need to know. Our presenter today is Chris McGonegle, and he's a product manager here at Sporty's Pilot Shop. He's our resident flight sim geek and our go-to when it comes to everything flight sim. One quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted for review later this week. So if you get distracted or want to go back and go over some of the material, you can do that so by going to sportys.com/webinars. With that, I'll hand it over to Chris. Chris, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for that introduction. As Doug mentioned, this is Flight Sim 101. I like to make it known that we used to run a long, comprehensive webinar covering everything Flight Sim, and this year we're going to try something new. We're going to do a intro or Flight Sim 101 version, and then in about 5 or 6 months we'll do another version of Flight Sim 201, if you will. There will be no cumulative test, so no need to take notes. But today will kind of be just the surface level and introduction to a home flight simulator. So let's go ahead and get started. As Doug mentioned, my name is Chris McGonegle. I am a product manager here at Sporty's Pilot Shop. I am a commercial pilot and then also a flight simulator enthusiast or specialist, if you will. You can find me on a lot of YouTube video reviews talking about hardware. While at the same time, I like to get into a Cessna 172 and go for a breakfast run or go grab some coffee before heading into the office. The picture on the right there is me at a younger age when I got my commercial certificate. So I like to think I have a pretty good grasp between what a digital aircraft can do and then what a physical real world aircraft can do. So let's jump into today's outline for our Flight Sim 101 introduction. We are going to talk about early flight simulators and what they offered and how they've grown for use at home. We're going to talk about software options, and we're not going to get into the 5 or 6 we could talk about. We're just going to talk about 2 options that cover about 90% of the flight sim market. We're also going to talk about your computer needs, what's needed to run said software. We're going to get into hardware, what kind of pieces you'll need in order to send information to your flight simulator. We're going to look at accessories to add on to hardware, not needed, but they're nice to have. We'll also look at logging time, one of the most popular questions we get in the flight sim department. We're going to talk about what kind of value a flight sim offers for pilots. And then lastly, if you are interested, we're going to give you a lot of additional resources to do your research before committing to a flight simulator or continuing to gain knowledge when you have a flight simulator. So let's look at how far we've come. Now, it was back in the early 80s when flight simulators became available at home use. Now, back in that time, PC was a lot more expensive when factoring in all things inflation, value of a dollar, everything. So not as many people had an at-home flight simulator back in the early 80s, but at least there was something there if you did have that PC at home. Now, as you can see, they started quite basic. Here we have Microsoft Flight Sim 2.0 and 84. And as they progressed, more colors were added to the screens. We also started to get some additional aircraft options. They started focusing on 3D dials, so you can see a little bit of depth on the dials for Flight Sim 2004. More customizable features started to be added, and then today we come to the vivid, beautiful current versions of the simulator options we can use at home, which offer a lot of ability and kind of very insightful to see where we've come since 1984. So let's talk about what makes an at-home flight simulator. I want to build one at home. I recognize the value. What do I need from zero to hero of having a simulator at home? And I like to say there's 3 legs to the stool here. The first one is you are going to need a computer. So we'll talk about that briefly. You're going to need software. So whereas the computer is kind of the foundation of what a simulator can do. The software is the brains, if you will. It tells the program when your digital aircraft banks, or when you're pulling back with this much force, how high the pitch the nose is going to go. Computer by itself will not be able to run a program. You need software, which is developed by these two companies we're about to get to in just a second. And then the third leg of that stool is the hardware. You can have a computer, you could have the best flight simulator program installed on said computer, but if you're using a keyboard and mouse, you're not really going to be able to get the benefits. So we highly recommend investigating some hardware options. There are a lot out there. Again, we're just going to talk about maybe a dozen to save time. But it is worth recognizing getting a yoke, maybe a stick, some throttles, some rudder pedals, things of that sort. But once you have those three legs of your stool, you have your flight simulator. All right, so let's talk about our first software option, and that is Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. This program came out in August of 2020, and it has been a windfall for the digital community when it comes to flight simulators. As you can see, it has been labeled the game of the year. That is a screen grab right there. It is a very vivid program. And if you do a little bit of research or watch a lot of the video reviews of Microsoft Flight Simulator, the way that program originated was we want to create a vivid, beautiful world, be able to go look at bridges or sunsets at a national park, or recreate cities, if you will, and then let's populate an airplane in there so you can go explore them. You're not just a drone camera flying around these cities. We want to put some aircraft in there. The reason I bring that up is because they started with how the outside of the aircraft looks first, and then started focusing on the inside. It's worth noting because the next program we'll talk about took a little bit of a different approach, but either way, Microsoft really wanted to make sure when you're looking outside that window, you get realistic views of the world, and maybe not so much on certain performance characteristics, but more on that to come in just a few seconds. The other program we're going to talk about today is X-Plane 11. Now, this program came out in November of 2016. So a term I like to use is seasoned. And you'll see a lot of sim enthusiasts are running this program because they took the opposite approach of what Microsoft did. They started with what's the internal of the aircraft and how is it going to operate? When I'm on a runway and I'm loaded to 2,575 pounds, I go full throttle, my density altitude is 1,200 feet. What is going to be the performance of that aircraft? And a Cessna 172 in X-Plane 11 is remarkably accurate to what you would get in the real world. That being said, when you are climbing out at VY or VX from said airport and you look over to your left or to your right, you're going to notice the trees, the grass, the lakes. You can tell it is a simulator. It doesn't have that real world feeling or vividness, if you will, of Microsoft's program. But if you are focused on what's happening inside the aircraft, or you're trying instrument training where you don't care what the lake beneath you looks like because you're in the clouds, you can't see it. You're just focused on the indications inside the aircraft. Strong one to consider. Let's talk about computer needs, and whether you have a computer and then you want to understand what program works with it, or vice versa. You are dead set on getting this program and now you need to figure out what kind of computer you need. We're going to kind of broach that subject here. So here is the public requirements that Microsoft promoted right as their program was coming out, and it gets into what you would need to have the minimum specs, the recommended specs, and then also the ideal specs for a simulator. Now, I'm going to look at the NVIDIA, if you will, column for the minimum and then the recommended specs. And as we go down this list, you know, in the 201 webinar, we will really get into what each one of these rows and columns means. For today's reference, I'm kind of just going to skim over it. But basically, operating version or min OS version, that's just the operating system that your PC will need. So Windows 10 out of the gate. For CPU or tower, I would say it gets into the processing unit and how fast your processor needs to be. Easy way to say is the higher the number, the more powerful the processor, and therefore the more expensive. So for the minimum specs processor, we're looking at an Intel 4460. When you go up to recommended, it's the Intel 8400. Again, I'm not going to get into all the details, but just understand it's increasing a little bit. GPU, graphics card, as you can see, the numbers increase. Video RAM, 2 gigabytes versus 4 gigabytes. That's pretty normal in today's computers. RAM or random access memory, that's where it really starts to increase versus what you would see at some of the big box stores. We have 8 gigabytes for the smaller and then 16 for the larger. And then storage. This is a big one for Microsoft Flight Simulator. You need 150 gigabytes of storage for this program. Now, it's not going to take 150 just to install it and load the default aircraft. It's probably closer to 110, maybe 120, but Microsoft likes to build in a little bit there just to give you a little bit of leeway in case you do add some other items. And it's something worth being aware of. If you have a older PC or not the most extensive amount of storage, Microsoft may not be the best option for you. And then lastly, we have bandwidth. And what that means is how quickly do you have internet feeding in to your computer or your flight simulator? Microsoft requires bandwidth because there are options to have live weather. So it's constantly pulling information of where clouds are, where precipitation is rolling through the country, things of that sort, and therefore it needs to have quick updates or data coming into it. You can also populate in other aircraft in the real world. It will pull track logs from a couple different flight tracking software programs and populate it into the simulator. So again, it needs that constant flow of data coming into the program. Otherwise, you're going to have laggy versions or just incomplete files coming. So that's something unique about Microsoft. And then as we look at X-Plane's equivalent of this, you can see it's a little less demanding. Between the minimum and the recommended requirements, it requires a little bit less of an operating system. The CPU is a little bit smaller also. Graphics card, we're talking apples and oranges here. These are different brands, so it's tough to compare those numbers, but I will say it doesn't require as much. Video RAM is lower, and then also RAM, random access memory. It is higher on the recommended spec for X-Plane 11. That's the only, I'd say, version that X-Plane demands more than Microsoft Flight Simulator. But you don't have to have that much in order for it to operate. And then storage is 16 gigabytes, whereas Microsoft's was 150. So almost 1/10 of what Microsoft would need, and you can store this program on your PC. Bandwidth, it does not pull live weather. Now you can populate, say, live weather and start a flight. So whatever the weather was at that point, you jump into that scenario, but it will not update during the flight. It will fly based off what the weather was when you started the flight. It does not populate also, I should say the native version does not populate other aircraft, so that's why bandwidth is not on here. Two other things worth recommending, or highlighting I should say, for X-Plane, is that it is Apple compatible. So if you've got an Apple tower at home and you want to look into adding a flight simulator to it, Microsoft is not an option. Microsoft Flight Simulator is not an option. X-Plane is going to be the one you go with. And then a second thing about X-Plane that's nice is you can download and try the X-Plane 11 demo on your PC, your Apple, your laptop, whatever you like. Now, the way the demo works is it will actually download the entire program, but keep you in a demo version that usually gives you only about 15 minutes of flight time before it starts you back over and you hit start and go take off again. So it gives you a small portion of what it offers. The reason I bring it up is because you already have that program. So once you purchase the key and use it, it unlocks it all. So when you're using the free X-Plane demo, you're actually testing your PC more or less. Will you work with the whole program, which has been installed, which is operating? So it's a great way to test out, does my computer have what it takes to run X-Plane 11? which helps a lot of customers out, whereas Microsoft Flight Simulator does not offer that same feature. So some food for thought there. And then of course, it helps to put these comparisons next to each other. As you can see here, the bigger numbers, when you look at CPU, X-Plane is lower than what's recommended for Microsoft Flight Simulator. We're pretty much in the same when it comes to graphics cards, when it comes to video RAM, when it comes to RAM. X-Plane again takes the cake on recommended. But again, what I'm coming back to is the storage. If you have an older PC or MacBook and you don't want something that's going to be a Goliath in your storage, X-Plane is one worth considering. So either way, Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane 11, both phenomenal programs, both have their strengths, both have some weaknesses, but it's worth knowing what's required to get it running at a good cadence before you go ahead and buy a PC or buy said program. But that's enough about software. Let's jump into hardware. So we are going to focus on yokes, we're going to focus on throttles, and then we're going to quickly talk about rudder pedals, and then lastly some accessories. So to begin with yokes, we're going to talk about our most popular yoke, which is the Satec or Logitech Flight Simulator yoke with throttle quadrant. Now it is the longest standing yoke we sell here at Sporty's, and it's a favorite because the package you get is in that image. You'll get a yoke for roll, for pitch. You'll even get a timer on the front face, as you can see there, a couple buttons on top of each yoke handle. And then you also get a throttle management system to the right, which has 3 levers. So one for throttle, one for propeller, and one for mixture. Those can be reconfigured if you like also. If you want just 2 levers, 3, whatever works for you. And then there's 6 buttons at the base that can be configured for, say, flaps, for trim, things of that sort. So that's our most popular piece. Our highest rated piece is the Honeycomb Alpha Flight Simulator yoke on the right. This is one of those when you see a customer get their hands on it and use it, you can kind of just see the appreciation and how it feels. It really does feel like a very expensive yoke at a fraction of the cost. It came out in 2019. It's got a couple family member components along with it in the Honeycomb brand, but it was the first one out of Honeycomb, and it's found a real following in the flight sim community. Yoke goes a full 90 degrees left and right of center, which is unique. It uses ball bearings internally, so that very smooth motion I mentioned. And then we have our switches on the left, some light switches, and then the magneto on the right. So overall a great piece and a lot of customers who enjoy using it. As we continue up the professionalism, if you will, or even realism scale, Turtle Beach Velocity 1 is a new entrant to the flight sim community. This yoke and throttle is unique because it's one of the very few throttles out there that has the push-pull levers you can see attached to that throttle body. It also has levers above it. So if one day you want to be in a Cessna 172 push-pull throttle, and then the next day you want to be in a Cessna Citation with those white levers, you have that ability. There's also a very accurate trim wheel. There are 90 degrees rotation left and right, just like the Honeycomb, and a lot of other features that make it a great piece. It is Xbox compatible. So if you do go down the path of using an Xbox for a flight simulator, which it will only work with Microsoft, I'd recommend considering the Turtle Beach Velocity 1, or you can also go with the Thrustmaster Boeing yoke on the right. This is the first yoke, to my knowledge, that Thrustmaster has created. They make a lot of sticks, but this is the very first yoke, and it is modeled after the Boeing style yoke, which you can see the pivot point is actually at the base of the yoke. The previous flights or yokes we've talked about, the push, pull, back and forth, this one actually pivots about the base. So very similar to what you'd find in a Boeing aircraft. And it too comes with throttles on the side, which can be reconfigured. In the image, we have a speed brake and then our 2 throttles. You can move those around to the lever 1 and lever 2 are throttles, and then lever right would be your flaps. But either way, it's a great piece. It's got a lot of great features, and it too is Xbox compatible. So those are the yoke options we have in front of us. Now let's say you go with the Honeycomb Alpha, which I talked about on the previous slide, which is the only option out of these four that does not have throttle included. You're going to need to add some throttle to it, and we have a few options there. You are able to add on the standalone Logitech throttle by itself, which, as mentioned, has those 3 levers on top and then the 3 two-way buttons at the base. We also offer the CH Products multi-engine throttle, which, as you would have guessed, has 6 levers: 2 throttle, 2 prop, 2 mixture, and then those two-way switches in the gray, as you can see, 6 of them for whatever configuration you like. And that too can be configured to, if one day you don't want to fly a Piper Aztec and you want to step back into Cherokee or something of that sort, you can configure it so that only a few levers work rather than all 6. And then Honeycomb, the second option to come out of the Honeycomb line is the Honeycomb Bravo. And this is the Swiss Army knife of throttles, if you will. It has a lot of options, a lot of commands, a lot of things it can do in this Honeycomb Bravo package. We'll start with some of them. The autopilot controls, which are along the top of the Honeycomb Bravo, are a great way to better understand when you can transfer some responsibilities to the aircraft, get a better understanding of vertical speed, versus altimeter settings versus heading versus nav, all the above. It's a great way to test that out. On the left side, we'll see a 2-position gear lever with an accurate 3 light indicator on the front of the panel, so you can see when gears are tracted or it's in movement. We have a color-coded trim wheel allowing for change in your profile while flying. This has 6 levers that come with the Honeycomb Bravo. And as you can see here, it is configured for multi-engine GA. We'll get into some of the other configurations you can do in just a second. There's a tension knob on the bottom right side. So if you don't like the kind of tension you're getting with the lever, you can tighten it up or loosen it. And then lastly, there's also a flaps lever on the far right side of the Honeycomb Bravo. Similar to what you'd find in a 172. So really a lot of features and abilities the Honeycomb Bravo can do. It's actually a lot of the, or I should say, similar mold to the Honeycomb Alpha. So when you put them next to each other, you can tell they're meant to be used in tandem. Uh, but I'll circle back to the final point worth highlighting is the levers on this are completely configurable. And here we have GA levers. We also have some commercial levers to factor in. So let's say we don't want to do the multi-engine GA. We want to get back to a Cessna 172. Well, here's just throttle and mixture setup, and the other levers aren't in use. Okay, let's add in a propeller control, and we have this set up here in front of us. We can, of course, go back to the multi-GA aircraft, and then we can get into the commercial aircraft, if you will. Here is a 2-jet configuration. And then lastly, here is a 4-jet commercial airliner configuration. So really, the Honeycomb Bravo can accomplish a lot of missions. It is a very popular piece. If you find yourself flying with a yoke that doesn't have throttle or a stick, and you want to upgrade the throttle management, it's worth considering the Honeycomb Bravo. All right, so let's talk about our third hardware piece, rudder pedals. These are needed to make sure we can taxi when on the ground. We want to make sure we come to full stops with those toe brakes, and then also help us when we're coming in with a little bit of crosswind. So really, one of the most popular pieces we offer here at Sporty's is the Thrustmaster Flight rudder pedals. You'll see on the left side, they have counter sliding pedals. So if you push on the right, the left will come back. They both have independent toe brakes, and really a small but yet applicable piece for if you want to have an accurate flight simulator. Next step up is the Logitech rudder pedals on the right, which builds on the design of the Thrustmaster versions by adding a tension wheel on the center. So if you want to change what kind of give those pedals offer, you can do that. And then there's also footwell customization. So you can change how large or how small those footwells are to whatever is comfortable for you as you're flying. Moving on, we also have the Thrustmaster TPR rudder pedals. These are great complements to that Boeing yoke we talked about earlier because these are designed after the way the Boeing rudder pedals operate in those aircraft. You'll notice that they don't slide on the floor similar to the other ones. They actually pivot from a point above where your feet rest. And because of that, it's a more realistic, it's a more true feel of how these pedals operate. And they are majority metal construction. When I put together the ones we use here at Sporty's, I worked up a little bit of a sweat. They're a good, I believe, 25 pounds. And they also offer a lot of customization options. So you can change the tension for moving the pedals. You can also change that angle that your foot well rests at. So a lot of great pieces about it. And again, another one that if you're serious about flight sim, worth considering. And then lastly, we have the Redbird RD1 rudder pedals. These are completely metal, again, very bulky, but a lot of customers like them because they're very similar to what you see in a Cessna 172. Let's look at a couple quick accessories. First one I like to highlight for someone is an EFB mount, or electronic flight bag mount. This is a way so that if you fly with an iPad or another tablet or even a phone, you're able to mount that to your desk and have it work in tandem with your flight simulator and use your program on your tablet to work along with the sim. Very helpful piece and one worth highlighting. And then the second piece is our Trim Wheel Pro, which you'll notice on the right. I like the Trim Wheel Pro because it is a trim wheel in essence, but you'll notice in a lot of sims, when you do one full circle rotation of the trim wheel, it may not be accurate to what you expect in the aircraft. Well, the manufacturer of the Trim Wheel Pro fixed that by adding a little knob on the top of the Trim Wheel Pro. And that way you can change the amount of change in that trim wheel that it's sending to your PC. So no longer having to pause a flight and maybe move a sensitivity wheel in the program, you can just turn that dial a little bit and a full rotation of that knob is going to send less of an indication to the program than it was previously. So a really nice way to customize that piece and get real world simulation. Next up, we have the ProFlight radio panel and the ProFlight multi-panel. These are great pieces if you really, again, want to build on a simulator and bring it closer to what you'd experience in training in a 172 or another aircraft. The radio panel allows you to control comms, nav, and get into a couple other features. And really just a great piece if you want to keep communications sharp. And then the multi-panel is a step towards getting better understanding of your autopilot. You can send those autopilot commands and have a easily visible indication on your desk or wherever your simulator is set up of what your altitude set for, your vertical speed, changing those things. And then it too also has a pitch trim wheel and then also a flaps lever included. So great add-ons for anyone who has a simulator and maybe wants to increase the realism, and worth considering. Let's move on to the most common question we usually get asked, which is, can I log approaches at home? The short answer is yes, but I'm also going to give you the long answer here. In order to use a flight simulator at home and log approaches, you need what's called a basic aviation training device. Now, we offer a couple here at Sporty's, and they actually recently just changed how a BATD, if you will, can be used at home. So during the summer of 2018, a few years ago now, the FAA announced a significant change that aims to make it easier for pilots to keep their instrument currency using an aviation training device or basic aviation training device at home. With the Redbird TD or the TD2, it incorporates pedals and it qualifies as a basic aviation training device. Now, FAR 6151 or Federal Aviation Regulation 61.51 was amended to remove any reference to a flight instructor. So in essence, pilots can do instrument flights at home without scheduling an instructor. And FAR 61.51 reads, a person may use time in a full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device for satisfying instrument currency experience requirements, provided a logbook or training record is maintained to specify the training device time and the content. In addition, FAR 6157 was also amended to allow flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device to be used for maintaining instrument experience, which covers the familiar 6 approaches. And FAR 61.57 reads, provided the device represents the category of aircraft for the instrument rating privileges to be maintained, and the pilot performs the tasks and iterations in simulated instrument conditions, a person may complete the instrument experience in any combination of an aircraft, full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device. So long story short, you are able to use at-home certified devices with the required rudder pedals for instrument training without an instructor, and you may complete the required tasks to stay current at home. So it is possible to log time at home, to put some ink in your logbook, if you will, but it is quite expensive. Again, the 2 options we offer here at Sporty's are the Redbird TD Flight Simulator, the Redbird TD2. Both are available to come in both steam gauges or a glass cockpit configuration. And the Redbird TD2 builds on the TD by incorporating landing gear and then also propeller control. Again, these are expensive options, but if you are committed to it, or maybe running a flight school where it helps to have easy access to flying these scenarios in a basic aviation training device and keeping instructors current, it is worth doing a little bit of research in. But for majority of the customers we deal with here at Sporty's, when it comes to logging time, I like to say a sim is better for saving time rather than logging time. There are a lot of values a student or a burgeoning pilot can really take away from a simulator that doesn't go in the logbook. So it's worth remembering that you can save time in training rather than logging time. And then secondly, I like to say use it to strengthen a muscle, but not learn an exercise. You could go find a training course outline online. You could jump in, you could run through 15 of those lessons. But if you pick up a bad quality in how you do power on stalls, or you don't run cross checks correctly or something of that sort, it could really feed into having a negative habit, which will set you back in real life training. That's the reason I like to say use it as strengthening a muscle. Once you've done a maneuver a few times, don't use it to learn that exercise. Another thing I like to mention when we're talking about flight simulators is the 10-foot rule. What I mean by this rule is, and I've heard a lot of people confer this, that simulators are great once they're above 10 feet off the ground. It is able to help you learn how to run radios or how to navigate to a waypoint or a lot of different maneuvers once you're airborne. But when it comes to flaring the aircraft in a zero wind condition, simulators are a little lacking in getting that exact feel for what you would feel in the aircraft. This actually led to an interesting experience for myself when in the cold months of the year here in Cincinnati, I hadn't jumped in an airplane for a while, but I'd flown a lot of simulator flights. And my mind and my muscle memory kind of took a step towards the digital feeling of flaring an airplane rather than the physical. And when I went and flew for the first time, it was okay, you thought you knew what it was going to feel like, and you're a little off. And that was a real wake up moment for me of making sure that understanding there are certain things a simulator cannot recreate, and flaring the aircraft is one of them. Another thing that happens when on the ground is taxiing. I have yet to really find a flight simulator that offers accurate taxiing. I can assure you to make a 90-degree turn in a Cessna 172, I don't need to go 80% throttle and step on the left brake to turn onto the runway, which a lot of simulators today require. So really look at it as the value really starts coming to you once you're airborne, and just keep the 10-foot rule in mind. But once you have a simulator, let's talk about some of the values you can use it for. First one I like to talk about is checklist memory. So I was one of those students who took that Cessna 172 poster you see in front of you. I put it on the back of a door and I would just sit right next to it, right in front of it, and I'd run through my emergency scenarios and my checklists. And what do I do? What knobs do I turn? Where do I go with fuel? What restart protocols are there? And in every time I did that, I had to assume or mentally simulate, if you will, what would happen based off my inputs. A simulator is great because it can give us reactions to what happens to those inputs. When we try and start the magneto as that propeller is windmilling, what's going to happen? When we go full mixture and we turn on the fuel pump, what's going to happen? You can really look at a simulator to give you maybe not 100% answers on what would happen, but 90%. And that really makes it a great training situation. So it really helps with memorizing those checklist items and also giving you a little bit of feedback as you're running through those scenarios. Next up, we have NDBs. And for anyone who flies, I'm sure they're scoffing at their screen right now saying, why would I want to go test my flying of an NDB? And I'm going to counter with, because you can do it for free in a simulator, where if you ever want to go do it in an aircraft, you're paying quite a bit per 1 minute on that tachometer. So if there's ever a time to understand how to track to an NDB, how to factor in the wind, how to tune, identify, all the above, a simulator is the right place to do it. But yes, you are correct. NDBs are a dying phase of aviation, and it's only a matter of time before we start seeing any of them out there. Let's take a step up to VORs. VOR tracking and better understanding was very helpful for me when I was doing my training. When I finally realized that an aircraft can be pointed in any direction, its heading can change, but yet its location on a map in relation to a VOR is going to give the same indication. There was a light bulb that went off that day. So a simulator is a great way to test that and to show whether you're flying due west, whether you're flying due east, due north, at that position, that needle is going to be at that angle. It was a very helpful thing for me to figure out, and a flight simulator is an easy way to test that out and get a better understanding of those VORs. Next up, instruments and avionics. During my training, I remember once I learned how to fly an aircraft, I then had to learn a programming language to figure out the GPS. It wasn't only enough to do this new challenging task of flying an aircraft, I had to learn how to punch in flight plans into the Garmin 530. Now we can do that on the ground in the comfort of our home with a cup of coffee next to us and run through what these knobs, what these buttons, what a direct to does, what changing of the PFD to the MFD does. We can do all that from our home and understand how the instruments and the avionics in our aircraft work. Here's an actual screen grab from the Cessna 172 G1000 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so you can see it's extremely detailed, and we'll give you a lot of indications of what those buttons do and better prepare you for that next flight where you have to use a G1000 or that Garmin 530 I referenced. I also like to look at a simulator as a way to test out scenarios I'd never be in essence, in a Cessna 172, but it gives me a blatant, better understanding. And one of those is density altitude understanding. So here we have a picture of Telluride Airport. I believe that airport's elevation is right around 9,500 feet. And as you can see, once you get airborne, there's also some other challenging things to throw into this system with those peaks right in front of us. Not exactly a good scenario for a Cessna 172. But I'd like to go challenge it and get a better understanding of how an aircraft performs in those situations rather than just at our home base with an MSL below 1,000 feet. So it really helps you understand how an engine operates, how a wing operates when the air is a lot thinner. A term I threw out earlier is EFB, or electronic flight bag, and its understanding. If you fly with an EFB, regardless of what program it is, they will connect to a home flight simulator. So you can go fly these digital flights, which will again project onto your EFB. The one I use quite a bit is ForeFlight, and ForeFlight is always rolling out new features, new things they've upgraded in the software, new programming availabilities. Well, rather than go pre-flight an aircraft and fly up to its service ceiling and maybe test out one of their newer features, which was turbulence layers, I can jump in the simulator and in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes, I can be up at that height, not costing me a lot of money, and see how those layers or those new features apply to my electronic flight bag. So a really helpful way to test out how you fly. And then secondly, you can control the weather in a flight simulator. So let's say you want to fly an approach down to your minimums, or you want to see what it's like flying into some turbulent weather. You have the ability to go do that in a controlled environment at home, and you can really go test what it's going to be like doing that, so that if you hopefully never find yourself in this scenario, but if you do fall into one, it's not your first time experiencing something similar to it. So worth highlighting there. Another thing that today's simulators offer is cross-country pre-flighting. Let's say you're doing one of those long solo cross countries to an airport, and you've got to stop and land and get refueled up before you head on home. It's helpful to know what the terrain's going to look like, or when you can expect those changes in your frequencies. And a home simulator is an easy way to do it. Now, I will say you're not going to have to fly the length of time that you would in the real aircraft. If you maybe want to just do the descent profile or the taking off profile, you have that ability. But it can also really help you get prepared for a long flight to an airport you're not familiar with. This was one I flew the other day, and as you can see, I'm getting close to the airport. It gets pretty vivid in the profile of cities I'm getting ready to fly over before I'm at the airport, maybe a railroad that I flew over, a lake, things of that sort. Just a helpful way to prepare yourself for that cross country. All right, so those are some best uses. Let's transition to the additional resources. There are a lot of options and places out there to get information on flight simulators. Sure, you can build one of these great pieces, you can have it at home, you can fly it for whatever scenarios you'd like, but if you want to continue to sharpen your skills as a pilot, or digital pilot if you will, it makes sense to keep up with some of the changing landscape of the flight sim community. For those reasons, I like to highlight a company we work with quite a bit, Flight Sim Association. You can see their homepage on the left there. They really apply a lot towards the digital pilot and what's changing in all aspects of the flight sim community. And then we also offer our flight simulator update campaign here at Sporty's Pilot Shop, reviewing a lot of the hardware we sell, how it operates with some of the software programs out there, some of the newer items to enter the market. We really like to get hands-on and tell you what we like, what we don't like. So I'd recommend checking out some of our emails. So the radio check by Flight Sim Association is done weekly, whereas here at Sporties, we have a monthly email we send out called Flight Sim Update, where we like to explain what's happening in the flight sim community, maybe give some video reviews, and then also offer a few articles to kind of just keep everyone up to date in what's changing in this flight sim world. Another thing worth highlighting is YouTube knowledge. It used to be I would Google something if I wanted to know more about it. I think YouTube is starting to pick up on a lot of that market of, hey, I want to know how to do something in my yard, or I want to know something better for mathematics. You can find a lot of this on YouTube, and Flight Sim falls into this similarly. X-Plane has a very focused and archived buildup of all the videos they've created. They even have some features of upcoming projects or upcoming upgrades to their programs, and really a great way to find out what the team over at X-Plane or Laminar Research is up to. And then Microsoft also offers a lot of live streams, a lot of scheduled interviews with some of their lead developers, a lot of great video footage and interview footage to help you better understand the program and also, again, what they're working on. And then lastly, you get a lot of third-party YouTubers, if you will, who love to, if they're real-world pilots, jump in a real airplane and compare it to a digital airplane, or some of the larger aircraft, which I can't speak for. They'll give full hands-on reviews. So a great place to find a lot of information and also to take in a lot of fun flights that other people have experienced. We also like to mention freeware, if you will, which is basically software that doesn't cost you anything. Here at Sporty's, we've developed a couple options for you. With Microsoft Flight Simulator, we have a digital India 69er or digital Claremont County Airport. And true to the real world, we have the hot dog grill. If you fly into Sporty's Airport on a Saturday between 12 and 2 o'clock, we have free hot dogs grilling out, and we like to give them out to customers who fly in. Well, we did the same thing for the digital representation of Sporty's. If you come on a Saturday between 12 and 2, you will see a little digital human being grilling up some hot dogs. So just a funny little Easter egg we put in there among others. But if you fly with Microsoft Flight Simulator, we hope you'll check out digital Claremont County Airport. And then with X-Plane, we recently just brought to market a simulator intro guide. So it comes out with 3 introductory maneuvers that once you click on one, you go through a briefing, you go through what's expected for maneuver, you click a button, and it throws you right into that scenario. You're cruising along at 3,000 feet getting ready to intercept an ILS, or you're coming perpendicular to a road so you can do your S-turns. It takes away the getting set up, getting everything leaned out. It's a great way to jump into it and practice some maneuvers if you fly via X-Plane, and that too is free. And then lastly, we offer a catalog of all the videos, reviews, webinars we've put together, even some internal PDFs that aren't public knowledge we keep in our flight simulator guide, which is designed off of our other courses. So a good flow, a nice navigational window to your left. And again, this is another free product we offer to the flight sim community to help customers get better educated. And then we also have payware, of course. If you've got some money burning a hole in your wallet, you can go ahead and you can buy products to add to a simulator. Another question I get a lot here at Sporty's is, I have airplane XYZ and I want to fly it digitally. How do I do that? If you remember earlier on, I said the X-Plane 11 program is seasoned because it's older. And because of that, there have been a lot of companies that have built add-ons for X-Plane just because it's been around for 6 years now, whereas Microsoft's version has been around for 2 years. So because of that, there's a larger catalog of digital aircraft, if you will, and you're able to find that aircraft that you're looking for, the airplane ABC in X-Plane, and populate it into your digital flight simulator and fly your Cherokee or whatever aircraft it is, or whatever avionics suite you're looking for. You're going to find that with X-Plane. And then also, of course, Microsoft has their marketplace, which is internal to Microsoft Flight Simulator. So it's extremely easy to find an aircraft, or as you can see on this window, say another airport, or even a mission that sounds appealing to you and the price is right. It's a couple clicks, the transaction is approved, and then it automatically stores in a very organized filing location on the program, and really reduces the challenge of buying a product and incorporating it to your simulator. So with both programs, a lot of ease in finding other aircraft or scenarios to add on. Another thing we like to highlight is, if you want to know why an aircraft does what it does, it's worth investigating to really appreciate a simulator. A lot of customers, and sometimes I'm guilty of this myself, I like to just jump in whatever aircraft has the most power, go full throttle, release the parking brake, and take off, see where this guy takes me. And that's fun, but it gets old. And if you want to understand how to fly a controlled approach, if you want to get into, say, a controlled maneuver of a Lazy 8 or a Chandelle, you really want to understand why that aircraft reacts the way it does. It's worth considering the Learn to Fly course, or some of these other courses that give you the ground lessons on what an aircraft does. Conclusion, a story I really like to tell is about Evan from Flight Sim Association. He was a part of that company I mentioned earlier, who has a lot of emails that come out. They have a very helpful website for flight sim interested customers. Evan did his training to be a pilot, And what I like telling about his story is when he jumped in his introductory flight, he started running the radios while his flight instructor was flying the aircraft. Now, I can tell you, when I did my intro flight, I was just a passenger taking in the views. I wanted to make sure that door was locked. I wasn't going to fall out of the aircraft. I don't think we banked more than 10 degrees that whole flight. I had a lot of fun, but in no point was I ready to take over controls or a portion of the aircraft myself. And Evan, because he was very comfortable with it, because he'd been using radios in his flight simulator at home, on his first intro flight, he was actually running the radios and talking to tower or to ADC. And that blows my mind. So I wanted to highlight the fact that a simulator can really offer some applicable experience and comfortability. And for Evan, it's gotten him to where he's flying some of the larger aircraft these days and really expedited his uh, his course to being a professional pilot. As we conclude, a lot of the products we talked about, a lot of the software we talked about are available at Sporty's Pilot Shop. We went ahead and made sure to include a flight simulators tab on our homepage, which organizes all our hardware, our software, some kits. If you don't want to do the shopping around, you just want one transaction to get everything you need. We also have some Microsoft Flight Simulator branded apparel, the certified trainers we mentioned. So really a lot of items in this category. And we hope you'll check this out if you are interested in learning more about simulators or maybe getting set up with a simulator. So that concludes my presentation. I believe Doug may have a question or two for me.
Chris, that's some really great info. I learn a lot every time you do one of these presentations. But you are correct. We have some questions from our amazing participants. We got a lot of them today, but there are some that just kept on coming up over and over again. So the one that really came up a lot was in budgeting. From a new pilot who has zero, no computers, no hardware, no anything. If I have to put a number on it, what can I expect to spend on a computer flight sim system for my home?
Sure. And I would say if we want to make it a challenge to how little we're going to spend on a simulator and technically have a simulator, I like to say the most expensive piece is going to be that computer, so a PC, if you will. You can buy a laptop. I know a lot of people who are enthusiasts, but they don't want the big robust PC. They just get a laptop, or so they can travel and use a simulator. So you can find a pretty good laptop for say $500–600. You can buy X-Plane 11, which is not the power hungry program and will work on a laptop for 60. And then you can buy a flight stick, which I apologize we did not cover today, but it's another hardware piece, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a stick that sits on a table. You push it forward, you pitch down, you pull back, you pitch up. You've got roll left and right. A lot of the flight sticks today, if you twist the stick, it's yaw. So we've got our rudder pedals taken care of. And then every stick I know of incorporates a throttle lever in it also. So you've really got the needs, which are pitch, roll, and yaw taken care of. You've got engine management. And we have a flight stick here at Sporty's called the Logitech flight stick. It is $40. So in review, we spent $500 on a laptop, 60 on the program, and 40 on a flight stick. So for $600 plus tax and shipping, you're going to have a simulator that will work at home.
That's terrific. That's a great price point where a lot of people, I think, can get into simming. The other reoccurring question we have here, Chris, has to do with Microsoft versus X-Plane. And we kind of talk about these as the Coke and Pepsi of flight sim here at Sporty's. Some people love Coke, some people love Pepsi. But what does Chris like? So we're going to hold your feet to the fire here, Chris. Which program is best for flight training, in your opinion?
Well, thank you, Doug, because now I'm going to get some emails after this webinar today from whoever I don't pick. But I want to answer your question as diplomatically as possible. I think they both offer really good training aspects. As I mentioned, if you're doing VFR training, and which is by reference outside the aircraft, you're looking at a point on the horizon as you do your steep turns, or you're using that road for your S turns, or even turns about a point. Microsoft Flight Simulator may be the better one because it's more detailed outside the aircraft and you're already airborne. If you're running instrument training, I will say hands down, I like X-Plane. X-Plane gets more granular in what type of weather I can work with. It also gives a little bit more precision on the instrument representation. So as I'm flying an ILS in the soup, I get better indications in X-Plane than I would in Microsoft. And then one final thing I will say is X-Plane gives you a more granular ability to turn on failures of the aircraft. So if you've ever heard of the impossible turn, or if you've ever wanted to challenge yourself by saying at some point in my next 120 minutes of flight time, I want an electrical failure, or I want fuel flow to degrade. You have the ability to do that in X-Plane, whereas Microsoft gives you a few options, but it's not as detail oriented, which brings you closer to the real thing. So those are a few item points, but I don't want to say if you're going to use it for training, you have to get this one versus that one. They both offer a lot of value, but I would say if it's VFR training or earlier training, I may sway towards Microsoft. When it's the latter half of your training, I'd go for X-Plane.
Very well answered there, Chris. But that does it for our Flight Sim 101 webinar here. You should stay tuned for 201 here in the future. And as Chris would say, have fun digitally flying.